dairy industry it's our biggest hurdle here in Aotearoa, here in our country, in terms of just our waterways, for example. Just the waterways that's a kaupapa, a project that I could spend the rest of my life on in terms of protecting. The greenhouse gas emissions created by this industry is a huge thing as well, but just water is probably going to be a big focus for me moving into the future. Water is life. Without water, all of us would perish.
Hey, friends and listeners of the Switch for Good podcast. Yep, that's you. I have some really exciting news. Dotsie and I have started a Switch for Good podcast Facebook group. We created it so we can build a community of fans that will help us improve the show and deliver on the topics that you want to learn more about. So we want to hear what your favorite content is, what you want more of, and what you want less of. And if you like the length of the show, Dotsie and I are always talking about the length of the show, right, Dotsie?
Yes.
We want to tailor our show around the needs and desires of our incredible listeners, almost 500,000 of you. And it's really simple to join. Just go to our Switch for Good Facebook page. That's Switch, the number 4, and then Good. And then click on groups. And there we are, the Switch for Good podcast chat. You can post directly in the group, share ideas, talk to other listeners, and connect with like-minded folks. So go, run, join our Facebook group and tell us what you want. The interviews are never as good when you're not there.
Oh, I missed you too.
But I got a present in the mail from you. Look at this, everybody.
Yeah, I'm the twin today. If you're on YouTube, all right, here are the new t-shirts and sweatshirts in the Switch for Good store. So go get one.
And you know what I told Ian, Dotsie? I said, a lot of times the organizations, they'll sell clothes with logos and stuff on that just really aren't cool. The t-shirts aren't fun to wear. And Dotsie is so fashionable that every single thing Switch for Good puts out is a great cut and with a great design. So anyway, he agreed. So yeah, everybody go to the Switch for Good store and look at the really cool Dairy is Done. And
the recycled fabrics.
Really? Oh, I love them even more. Thank you. Well, you were actually, the reason you were away last week is because you were trying to make sure Dairy is Done in Washington, D.C. So tell us about what you were doing, because some really important work, and I bet you learned a lot.
I did. That is such a great point. More than anything, I learned a lot. As you know, Switch for Good has partnered with the wonderful people at Animal Wellness Action, who have been changing laws and policies for animals on the Hill for 30 years, the leaders of the organization anyway. And so we are running hard and fast. And we've talked about this on the podcast before, because we did so much work in 2019 on getting soy milk in schools, right? At the same reimbursement as cow's milk, so that the schools can actually afford to have it in schools. And so that the children do not have to have what is called a milk note from a doctor or a parent that states why they don't want to take a dairy milk. That would be correct now, but they wouldn't have to have a note say the soy milk. So it's just so that they're both offered as a choice. And getting soy milk placed into the dietary guidelines as, quote, nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk. You and I both know, and so many of our listeners, that it's much, much better. But the new dietary guidelines of America did implement that, which were released at the beginning of 2020. So we've laser focused our fight, not to just all plant milks. First of all plant milks don't have the same macronutrient nutrition. So many of the kiddos that rely on the school breakfast program, the school lunch program, for many of them is their only nutrition during the day, period. They may not get dinner. So we couldn't get nut milks in there anyway because of nut allergies. And a great example is coconut milk, wonderful and delicious and nutritious in a variety of different ways. But if a child were to drink it every day, coconut milk has almost no protein and is about 43% fat, and much of that is saturated. So that would be an unfit option, right, for a child to be healthy and have something that has a good profile, good nutrient profile. So yeah, march to Washington. They did not tell me that we walk everywhere. So by the end of the first day, I felt like I had 2 broken ankles because I wore the wrong shoes.
Oh, you wore fashionable shoes, Dotsie. I'm sure you looked amazing.
I had to pick these outfits. I was like, I haven't had to go somewhere and look like sharp for 4 straight days in a row. And I don't even remember when. I mean, I didn't have to do it as an athlete, and it was just like, oh, it's stressful. But we walked everywhere. But I mean, long story short, it was just an incredible week of inspiration and education and information. And we walked away with the huge wins. So our letter asking for the aforementioned pieces is going to Thomas Vilsack, Secretary of Agriculture. We're going to first give him the opportunity to be able to right this wrong and fix this, and is going to him from the co-leaders, Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut, who's been in since the 90s. She's also the head of the Appropriations Committee, very powerful in Congress, and also Troy Carter, who is a freshman out of Louisiana, but extremely passionate about this issue. Because as we've talked about multiple times over, children of color are greatly affected by lactose intolerance, 75 to about 98%. And we would never have a food group, not that we're calling cow's milk food, but they do it in the school system, given to children every single day if it made 75 to 98% of white kids sick. Wouldn't happen in a million years. And so this is a true civil rights issue, and something that we discussed last week, and a bit that I learned from Dr. Milton Mills, who hit the streets with us on Thursday and was with us all day for the DeLauro meeting and for the Troy Carter meeting. I knew that the school lunch program started in 1946. And obviously, what happened in 1946?
Well, it was after World War II.
There you go. End of the war.
Oh, okay.
Into the war, we are flush with food commodities because all of a sudden we were feeding a lot of the armies from around the world during the war. And so all of a sudden we have all of these commodities and nowhere for it to go. So the dairy farmers like, you better figure something out, government. So really the school lunch program was born to dump dairy and to really find a home for this influx of commodities. That was the reason, which is like, that's not maybe the best reason to start a nutrition program, but so that's how it got going. However, Brown versus Board of Education was not until 1954, which obviously outlawed segregated schools. So I just get so teary-eyed when I talk about this every time this whole last week. There were no children of color in schools when they dumped milk on these schools. They didn't think about the children of color because they weren't there. Not saying they would have anyway, but we're talking 10, 11, 12, 13 years later, because as we know, Brown versus Board of Education did not end segregation on the day they dropped the gavel. It took, depending on the state, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. So it's that many years that there weren't any children of color to consider. And
so
not
that they didn't give school lunches to schools that were segregated for Black kids.
No.
Oh, wow.
No. Yeah. It's just like crazy to me that we aren't asking this question of fairness in school lunches until 2022. I mean, to look back and say that they were never considered. Is it not time that we consider? Would it not have been time to consider in 1960? Well, you know how I feel about it. From every single human that we talk to in Congress, every single chief of staff, a few chiefs of staff on the Republican side, we did not get one negative response. I think when they really see the issue and they really see that this is clearly a civil rights issue and this is clearly simply adding a choice for these kiddos. We're not trying to take something out that'll be later, right? Because all of the deleterious effects of dairy, but we are just asking that these kiddos who dairy makes very sick, who then are inhibited by that, and is for their learning, for their education, to be able to focus, right? And they just need a choice. So that's all we're asking for. So it was 100% positive from soup to nuts. I mean, they're just so many of them surprised, right? Just by like, wait a minute, hold on. What? How is this? There's no choice. They don't have any, so that's kind of disconcerting because it's like, why don't you know this? About half of them we had been working with prior to my visit there. So it was really an honor to go deeper into the issue with them. But all in all, it was a magnificent week. And I left with just so much hope that we're not only going to get this done, but, other things done after we win this. So
just to recap, if the Secretary of Agriculture, Vilsack, doesn't just implement this himself, allow soy milk to be reimbursed to schools at the equivalent rate of dairy cow milk, then it will become a bill that's sponsored by Delorio and the gentleman from Louisiana.
Right. Okay, correct. Cool. Yeah.
So
we want to give him the option. We're only going to wait to hear from him for a couple of weeks.
Okay.
And have that discussion. And there's some, some other work in working on him with him to really answer this, but we're not going to wait all that long because this needs to be pushed forward and made happen. So.
Well, okay. I guess it's okay that you weren't here last week because you were doing work.
I missed you though. I really did. I was thinking about you during the time of your recording.
And I got my shirt. So everybody go to switchforgood.org, not only to read about the great things Dotsy's doing in Washington, but also to get yourself a shirt. Also these awesome shirts. So Dotsy, today we have a really wonderful guest who's also a rebel, a rabble rouser like you are. And
you.
So let me introduce him. So today we're going to be talking about an amazing film that I hope all of you after this interview go out and see. Dotsy and I have both seen it. In fact, Switch for Good is an associate producer on the film, and it is incredible. And we're talking today with the film's co-producer and the main subject of the film. The movie is called Milked. Chris Huriwai is a passionate activist who grew up in Aotearoa, the Maori name for New Zealand. He continually speaks out about dairy's contribution to institutional racism in his country. He's also the co-founder of the animal rights project, Aotearoa Liberation League. When he's not out on the street doing human, climate, or animal rights activism, you can find him on his unicycle because he is a 3-time world champion. Amazing. So today we're going to talk to Chris about his amazing journey and his wonderful film that I hope the whole world will see. Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Kia ora kōrua, kia ora koutou, haere mai ki tēnei pahorangi. Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you.
I love it. And I really appreciate that you're honoring your Maori heritage. And we'll be doing that a lot in this today. And for those of you, once again, to just repeat, is that when we say Aotearoa, that means the country of New Zealand, right, Chris?
Kia ora, yes, thank you. Aotearoa. Thank you.
So let's start with you. Can you tell us about your relationship with animals and the environment when you were growing up?
Yeah. Well, first, can I just say, what an honor and a privilege it is to be on the podcast. I love sharing a space with, I'm now sharing the space that Dr. Milton Mills shared, and his important discussion in Kōrero around dietary racism has been a huge inspiration for me. Thank you so much for having me on. For me, my connection with the environment and with animals very much comes from my childhood. I was homeschooled, had a very isolated kind of upbringing, lived very rural, the last house on the street, gravel roads. We were the last power line, the power line that goes, delivers the power. The only people that would go past our house is like hunters and whatnot who would be going out into the bush. So lived a very isolated childhood, and my animals that I was looking after, me being the youngest in the family, it was my job to feed and look after all of our animals. they gave me my social nurturing and whatnot that children need. And so that's where my deep connection came. They were my brothers and sisters. They were my siblings. And then moving on, getting a bit older and understanding that I had different dietary options, because it's not really information that is freely given to people. When I started realizing that I could consume differently and eat different foods, I decided to take them off my plate and living more in alignment with my values and principles and adopting a vegetarian and then vegan lifestyle.
I'm so interested in the fact that you were homeschooled. Can you tell us a little bit about why you were homeschooled and how you feel that benefited you in terms of your outlook on the world?
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess I get a bit of my anti-authoritative side from my mother. She wasn't a big fan of all the schools in the area. She was an early childhood teacher herself and still is today. And she took it upon herself to homeschool myself and my two siblings who were living with me at the time. And yeah, I guess from the outside looking in, we understand that our school curriculum and whatnot is not necessarily relevant these days. It could be modernized and changed, and people could be taught some real practical life skills, which is really missing from schools. Mm-hmm. And so I would say my upbringing, my education pathway has helped me to think outside of the box and to question social norms and authorities and whatnot, which has been a big thing and a big, beneficial thing for me, because speaking out against the dairy industry, it's the country's largest industry. The Fonterra company is the largest company of Aotearoa. And there is this real deeply rooted belief that if you speak out against this industry, you're essentially speaking out against your whole country. And for me, of course, being Maori, this is a colonial industry that was never here pre-colonization. And so for it to be normalized by everybody that this is such an embedded and natural industry of our country, for me, highlights another big issue, the fact that Maori history, our ways of living with the land and doing things has been completely erased because we're now glamorizing and prioritizing this new industrial colonial industry.
As you had your aha moment from all of the animals that were your siblings in your life, and you moved away from putting them on your plate and their byproducts on your plate, how did your family react? How did mom react, siblings? Like, was it overnight, or was it a kind of a journey that you took for a short period of time?
Vegetarian first for about 10 years.
Okay.
So, I was eating cheese pizza and milkshakes, for another 10 years after I made the connection. But, dairy products they're a bit more disconnected, aren't they? With meat, you can see the suffering on your plate right there. But with dairy, it's a bit separated. But yeah, vegetarian for 10 years. And then I guess, through the vegetarian process, my family was very supportive. My mother was very supportive. She would always make 2 meals, for example. Every dinner, there was always something for everybody else to eat, and then there was an extra something for me to eat. She always made sure I was looked after. Yeah, much love to my mother. She was very supportive. My whole family, as a matter of fact, we all have difference of opinions, but we were able to get along on this in particular one. Later in life, my brother went vegan, and my mother is pretty close to vegan. She's in that interesting space of, she's closer to vegan than vegetarian, but there are still a few products that she's still clinging on to. And yeah, I think after about 10 years, I was in a good place in my life, really settled and kind of looking inward a bit more and wanting to develop myself. And I started looking at the environmental impacts of animal agriculture, which is mainly linked with dairy farming here in Aotearoa. And that helped to tie in the fact that I needed to take things a step further and to start living a vegan life. And from there, actually, is when I started to learn about all of the animal rights issues for chickens, for cows. It wasn't until I really looked at the environmental side that I was willing to look at what happened to the animals, because I knew it was going to be a hard thing to swallow. So having that understanding around the negative impacts on the environment helped me to connect with, the need to look a bit deeper in terms of what happened to the animals.
You were inspired by the film Cowspiracy. And
Yes.
now here you are making a film yourself with the director of Cowspiracy in your film.
Yeah. I mean, have to take my hat off and give the credit to Amy for that one, our director and producer. She made the connections with Keegan, and she put together a brilliant film that really captured his inspiration and attention. From there, he developed the original music for our film and gave us a lot of advice in terms of the actual direction of the film.
Okay.
I think he was flattered as well. He could see the similarities with Cowspiracy, and he could tell that this was a film that he needed to get behind. And so we're over the moon in terms of the support from Keegan and our other executive producers as well. We've had so much support. It's been an amazing process, and just big appreciation to Keegan and everybody else who's helped us.
James Cameron, for example, is an executive producer.
Particularly Susie Amos Cameron. Susie is the executive producer, and she's in the film. She as well has given us a bit of direction. She's helped us in interviews and other aspects of the film. So like all of our other executive producers, Susie is a big part of this film, and big appreciation out to her as well.
Well, without further ado, I'm dying to go into the film, because part of the reason of this podcast is we want to make everyone drool to see the film at the end of this interview, right? So it's just, it's an extraordinary journey through the underbelly of, as you said, Fonterra, New Zealand's largest company, not just like the largest dairy company, largest
company of the country. Yep.
And dairy, the dairy that New Zealand exports is the largest in the whole world, right? The largest export in the whole world.
Yep, we are the largest exporter of dairy products in the whole world for such a small country. It's hard to believe.
Okay, it is. And we know there's more cows there than people, and I'm going to say definitely than more cows than sheep.
Ooh, well,
there's a lot of sheep there when I went to race my bike there.
I think there are around 50 million or so sheep, or 20 million. The number is incredible. The amount of livestock animals that we have in Aotearoa, you really have to come here and to see the landscape and to see what it used to be and what it's now been changed into. This used to be a land covered in ancient, huge, tall, amazing, mighty forests, and they've all been removed and stripped for livestock animals. But yes, we have around 6 million dairy cows, human population of around 5 million humans. And then on top of that, of course, we have a big beef industry, we have a big sheep industry, deer farming, all sorts. But dairy cows alone, higher population than human beings.
Okay, so the film starts out with speaking about water, because as you mentioned, you had a really rural upbringing, and it's some video and pictures of you when you were little in all of the gorgeous, crystal clear water, and you could go anywhere you wanted when you were a little boy and jump in the water. I mean, that was safe to do. But now, because of what you've just mentioned, the animals and animal agriculture are taking over. There's a real biodiversity crisis. We got a big issue with nitrates and real pollution of the waterways. And I remember when the film starts out, there's a gentleman that is interviewed throughout the film who's fantastic, that says water is the life force, and if we don't look after the water, all of us will perish. And you and some others say that you can no longer swim freely in the water in the lakes anymore. And I believe one older woman said we would get sick, and that this didn't used to be the case when she was a little girl. What will you get sick from? And what has happened to the water? And what on earth can happen to unwind?
Ooh, to unwind, that's a big one. I'll try to address the other ones first. But so in Māori communities particularly, Māori, we live very rurally usually, and urbanization has affected us quite heavily, and really forced everyone to move into the cities, and our rural areas have been primarily turned into farm landscapes. And so if you live rurally still, often majority of our waterways have become too polluted from the farming industry, and that'll be because of use of fertilizers, which is where you get the nitrate and the phosphorus runoff. And when you get too many of those nutrients in waterways, it produces algal blooms, it produces plant growth, which sucks out the oxygen from the water and then changes the natural balance of the water. And that's when you can start getting all sorts of pathogens and contaminants that can make people and animals sick. And of course, there's the E. coli coming from the animals as well, which can make people sick. For particularly Māori who live rurally, we have our marae, our community houses out in rural areas. And those are areas where people can come back to connect with each other socially and run community events. And, that's where you build your thriving base for your community, is at your marae, your meeting house. And the normal activity, and, people growing up throughout Aotearoa will know this, the normal activity in these rural places is to go to the local waterways to swim. During summer, like for Christmas, for example, that's during our summer. And so everyone that meets up over the summer Christmas period, you always go down to your local waterway to swim. And that's your usual family free recreational activity. For a lot of people, particularly Māori communities, we now no longer have that free recreational space, which for me, I would say is important for our spiritual nourishment. And, it's not just about our social nourishment, but it's also about connecting to the environment and, building that connection with our younger generation to the natural world. And without those spaces, we're losing connection with the environment. We're losing reason to go back to our normal community meeting spaces, because they're no longer attractive, because they've been turned into farming landscapes and they've become too polluted. In terms of that topic, especially on how this impacts Māori, one way that we can wind back the clock here, or at least kind of reclaim some justice, is to find solutions to land settlement claims. Because here in Aotearoa, through colonization, for example, the government was able to create a whole bunch of laws to confiscate Māori land, unjust laws to confiscate Māori land. And so there are currently a lot of land disputes where land has been taken unjustly from Māori, and now we're currently going through a process to reclaim a lot of that land. And, it's I wouldn't call it a gamble, but a lot of people would say, if you give the land back to someone, they're just going to destroy it themselves, But for me, especially for me and my whānau, my family, Māori narratives and, tikanga, ways of living, they're very connected with the environment, with the natural world. And I think it's likewise for most Indigenous peoples across the world, is that we try our best, at the very least, to live more in alignment with the natural world rather than, Western industrial ways of, capitalistic ways of living with the world. And so, one way we can help wind back the clock is to bring justice to some of those historical land claims, which are ongoing here in Aotearoa.
Sounds so much like all the colonization that has happened, because the United States, the Europeans came and colonized here and took land away from the Native Americans. Then we agreed to put them on reservations. So we gave them land. Is that what?
Yep. I'm sure the cases are similar across the world. Here in Aotearoa, a lot of land has been given back to Māori, but then the land that they've been given back has been, for example, damaged.
That's same with the United States. We do the same thing.
Exactly the same. But now a lot of Māori are getting into dairy farming themselves, because that's just the primary economic model here. We don't really have an alternative, which is something that we're really pushing for, is the need for us to find alternatives, because obviously the current model is not sustainable.
And you do talk about that at the end of your film. It's interesting because your country is very, and you note this in the film, is forward thinking in that you were the first country to give a river legal rights, yet you are destroying your rivers with being so dependent on dairy, which is such a destroyer of clean water.
Exactly. Yeah. The first country, I would say in Western law, to give a waterway personhood, legal protection. Because for Māori, we look at landscapes, for example, like mountains and waterways as our literal ancestors that we descend from. And so, like I said before, Māori narratives around protecting and living with the natural world are very embedded into who we are. And so we're trying our best to propel and elevate those ways of relating to the natural world within our mainstream society, within the rules and laws that govern this country, to normalize a better relationship and a higher level of appreciation for the environment.
Yeah. So you realize, I'm assuming at a younger age than most, what's happening around you and the degradation and destruction by animal agriculture. What was the impetus for you saying, I'm going to make a film about this and I'm going to target Fonterra?
The biggest industry of the biggest industry.
You gotta aim
in the
high,
country.
right?
Damn straight. Good job.
If you're gonna go there, you gotta go there. Go big or go home. I think that's always been my attitude. It's funny you mentioned in the intro about unicycling. I didn't know we were going to talk about unicycling today, but so I am a 3-time world champion for street unicycling. It's an extreme sport. You can get really hurt doing this kind of thing. And that was the kind of attitude that I was coming from off the back, I was coming off the back of being a 3-time world champion into then doing vegan advocacy. I had a beautiful childhood where I could swim in my awa, my river, every day. I had a beautiful landscape. My house was out looking to, native bush, beautiful, beautiful bush, green everywhere. And so, had a really strong connection. And then when I realized the degradation caused by animal agriculture, I went directly to the source that I could see was causing the most destruction. And it was outlined by a freshwater ecologist who is interviewed in the film, Dr. Mike Joy. One of his early papers called Squandered is the piece that I first saw, which actually encouraged me to go vegan. This is the document that made me understand the environmental implications and then want to view it further in terms of animal rights. I have to, again, take my hat off to director, producer Amy Taylor. Completely her idea. She approached me to work on a smaller project, and we kind of joked about it. We were like, a cowspiracy version here in Aotearoa would be really great. One that talks about the dairy industry. At first, she wanted to look completely at animal agriculture. But the more we looked into things here in Aotearoa, the more blatant it became that we should focus directly on Fonterra. There are just so many spaces that Fonterra and the dairy industry pushes into negatively. So we're able to draw on experts from all over the place, but to still keep the conversation focused so that we could really try and, make some progress. Because if you make things too broad, too wide, it can be very difficult for people to swallow. The dairy industry, it is the backbone of the economy here. And it's emotionally tied into a lot of people, multiple generations of farmers. They've been living on their land since their ancestors came here. Like I say, with land confiscation and reparations for Maori, it's just a very sensitive topic. And so switching from talking broadly about animal agriculture to specifically talking about dairy, I think was the sensible thing to do, because this country here, Aotearoa, worldwide, it needs to be a widely discussed topic, but particularly here in Aotearoa, it's a very, very sensitive topic. Every time elections come, for example, dairy-related legislation and topics are forefront and center, top of the table. And so, yeah, we need to prioritize discussions around dairy here in Aotearoa.
Did you think that the Fonterra was going to answer your questions initially? You had questions obviously all about the environment, and they claim, I remember in the film, that they are actually 64% more efficient than all the other dairies and production facilities from around the world. And there's so much there. I was going to go into some more facts, but I'll let you do that. But I'm assuming you thought that they were going to talk to you about it, because if they make all of these claims about the environment, they would want to share them with you so that they can, try to like walk the talk and stand behind what they've said. But you couldn't get them on film.
You would think that if they were genuine, I'd say, that is the assumption, that they would be open to talking about these things and that they would be willing to promote their programs if they were genuine. But, prior to this film, I ran a project and Fonterra reached out to me, and I tried to get in touch with them to sit down and discuss things with them. And I never heard back from them after their initial invite to me. So I'm assuming, they thought they'd invite me out for a discussion just to make me feel like I'm being heard, I suppose. But they probably dug a little bit deeper and realized, oh, wow, this guy, he actually knows what he's talking about. And he takes.
And he's three-time world champion. They knew you're a fighter.
Maybe. But yeah, I think I never really knew if they would front for the film. We knew we had to keep pushing them. We knew we had to try as hard as we could. But when you live here and you understand this industry, you see their propaganda in almost every newspaper. Like they have corporate sponsorship partnerships with nationwide media outlets. They sponsor programs in schools. They fund programs in schools. They influence our dietary guidelines. Our politicians pander to our farmers constantly. We're unable to take brave stances on international issues because we rely so heavily on our export markets, especially to China, for example. Now, China have been involved in some incredibly, there are genocides going on in China, and they're our primary export market, and we're unable to call them out because of that export relationship. And so, when you understand here how embedded they are, the fact that, pretty much everybody knows somebody who is involved in the company or one of their wider services that they offer. It's pervasive, and they're going to do everything they can to maintain their position of power in our society. And it's just obvious. The more you look, the worse it is in terms of their corruption and lack of accountability and lack of responsibility. So for us, our job was to simply make sure that people know that we've done our best to reach out to them. But if I can be truthful, yes, I never actually thought that they would respond. I think it would have been somewhat of a death sentence if they had gotten involved. Obviously, it speaks perfectly to the situation, their absence. That speaks perfectly to the situation. But there's no way for them to truthfully, genuinely be involved and to work progressively because they're doing everything they can to fight progress.
And that is so obvious because you do get some dairy industry people on camera, and it is, I don't even want us to talk about it because it is so stunning. I want the people to go and look at these people just put their foot right in their mouths and totally give away the entire industry and how unable to defend it they are. It is amazing. Those two, there was two different people from the dairy industry you did get on camera. Bravo to you. I laughed out loud at how unable they were to justify their work.
Or just not even speak. The woman from Canterbury, the dry region, she answered none.
She said,
it was just like, I mean, I thought, oh gosh, why did she even sit down? This is so embarrassing.
I feel sorry for Claire. I mean, it's not her that should have to front that should
It's
have to
their
front these
industry.
things. It's their industry leadership who should be fronting these things. And
Right.
but yeah, good on her for sitting down for an interview. But yes, she was unable to answer any of our hard questions. She just wanted to show us some technology around one of their effluent ponds and how they were capturing methane from this effluent pond. And she, it's like she was dying to talk about that, but she was not willing to talk about anything else, despite us providing some of our questions beforehand and telling her it was going to be a very broad interview around the dairy industry. But yeah, I just feel really sorry for people like her. The fact that she will be portrayed as, the industry who wasn't able to front, but, they're scapegoats. They're like human shields that the industry uses. In the same way that, they talk about family farmers, for someone like myself with Milked, they'll say, oh, you're attacking family farmers. That will be their narrative. That will be what they say to defend themselves, that anything from the outside is attacking our, wholesome family farmers. But in reality, a lot of our farms aren't owned by the small, quaint family farms that most people imagine. These are huge corporate owned farms, of thousands of animals and very minimal amount of staff, because a lot of it is mechanized and, automated these days. But yeah, and I just wanted as well to add, in terms of the industry themselves, saying that they are the most efficient producers of dairy products. From our research, we found that they're very, very similar and potentially have no difference to a lot of other countries like Ireland, for example, other countries that have similar pasture-based systems that we have. And, it's industry-funded research. Every time you look into it, you see dubious natures within the methodology. It is an inherently unsustainable product. And I guess someone has to be the best at producing the worst thing in the world. But I would just be wary around saying that they are indeed the most efficient producers, because, it's from their own research and they've proven themselves to be untrustworthy.
Can you share about what the dairy industry as a whole looks like? Because there was a lot of green pasture, which you don't see as much here in the United States. Can you give us an idea of how these cows live?
Yep. So I think in comparison to a lot of systems, the dairy system here in Aotearoa probably looks quite idyllic at times. The majority of cows are raised on pasture. We have very few indoor operations. Only recently are we really starting to see codes of welfare legislation being put through for indoor farming. It's a very new kind of system here in Aotearoa. But yeah, because they are all outside and because our dairy farm systems are highly intensified, we have a lot of cows per paddock. And so their waste, their runoff, although it's more spread out, it's literally everywhere. And so that's why we see the impacts on our waterways so broadly. In terms of farming areas, 80% of waterways in farming areas are polluted or too polluted for us to swim in. And farming areas in Aotearoa represent about 50% of the country. And so with all of that waste being spread out everywhere, we're seeing the negative impacts on our environment. It does look idyllic and green, but like what one of the ecologists say, it only looks green because of the amount of fertilizer that we're putting on the pastures. Without all the fertilizer and whatnot, these would be barren deserts because of all the animals that we've got on them. But yeah, I think for a lot of people, it would look quite nice. But for me, I just go back to remembering the forests that would have been there before it got turned into paddocks for cows. Another bad thing, or a bad thing I should say, is in the winter, for example, because we're using outdoor farming systems, the grass grows less. And so some of our farmers use what's called a winter grazing system. And we show a lot of this footage in the film. The muddy, the wet, during the wintertime, it rains a lot and farmers have to change their system, which further concentrates the cows into a small specific area. which causes huge amounts of soil damage and soil runoff and water pollution. And of course, obviously, it's incredibly stressful for the cows themselves during this time of the year. This will be coming up to their calving season. And so they're going through the winter, standing on mud, not having places to lay down, in some cases actually giving birth in the mud, which is a welfare breach. But it happens because this is the most ideal time for the farmers to calve their animals, even though it's hard for the animals, lower welfare conditions, because it's more profitable, because it's coming into the season of grass growth. The farmers deem it the best time, to calve these beautiful creatures. But what else can I tell you? Our cows last as long as they do globally, about a 4 to 5 year lifespan before they're sent to the slaughterhouse, despite, a natural life potential of around 20, 25 years old. Bobby calves, the surplus calves from the industry, we have about 2 million per year.
I think a lot of people don't know what a bobby calf is.
Right. So, a bobby calf, a surplus calf, because of course, mother cow has to be impregnated and to give birth before she can produce milk. If it's not a female, which is recycled back into the dairy herd, it'll be sent to the slaughterhouse. And so, that's a bobby calf, of which around 2 million are killed per year here in Aotearoa.
Wow. And 95% of the milk produced in your country gets exported, and yet you get 100% of the environmental damage. And you are also going to Indonesia and damaging that country too for dairy. Yeah. Fonterra, they're trying to set up dairy farms internationally now. Some of them they've sold because it was a failed attempt at them. We need to downscale. They need to stop spreading their ways everywhere. But we export our product. 95% is exported. Often we hear from our farmers, that without them we'd starve, things like that, and that we're unappreciative of their food. But the majority of what they're producing is being sent elsewhere. And like you say, we're left with 100% of the pollution, the externalities. And we're exporting primarily to countries with high levels of lactose intolerance. Southeast Asia, our primary export demographic. And so, the business model doesn't make any sense. It's terrible for animals, terrible for the environment. And it's terrible for farmers as well. They're stuck in the system. All of us speaking negatively about them, of course, because they're stuck in a negative system. But they really lack support, which is what we really tried to highlight in the film, is our need to encourage and find solutions for our dairy farmers.
Yeah, it's the same here, where it's the rhetoric is always, oh gosh, you're damaging the poor small dairy farmer, which in reality we hardly have any left. And in the film, you all talk about that there's about a 400% increase in debt for farmers over the last many years. So it's certainly not a sustainable business for a small farmer to be in, and they're in. I know I've been introduced to a couple of farmers here in California who have lost their business because the debt was so high, and it's across the board for us here in the States, of animal agriculture, chicken farmers, pig farmers. The big companies just use and abuse their services, but the profits are always going in the company's pocket, not to the people that are doing the work.
Yeah.
It's an illusion.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we met some amazing farmers through our research and process of making this film. They're, in general, I would say they're incredible people. And, socially, they're used to being at the core of their communities. They're usually the food producers, the ones who, are the heart of a community, to be quite honest. The food producers. But now we've seen things change quite a lot here in Aotearoa. And a quote from the film from Tom, one of the dairy farmers, is, he now sees his milk vat, as not something to feed people from, but he simply sees it as a vat filled with money. And so, obviously things change then. For him, it's no longer about feeding people and being a part of the community. He's now just creating a product for this huge capitalistic, corporate, greedy industry. And yeah, I really feel for farmers because socially they've previously been such a core part of their communities, valued, appreciated by their communities, and now they've just been turned into this huge, destructive, greedy industry. And they're facing criticism from all sides, and there's really no clear pathways for them to exit this industry. And so, here in Aotearoa, and I'm sure it's similar across the world, is mental health of farmers is declining. A lot of, suicide in general here in Aotearoa is a serious issue. We have huge mental health issues here in Aotearoa, and that's exacerbated by the stresses and the issues that are inherent in the dairy industry. And it's an incredibly volatile market. It's always changing. Farmers don't know if they're going to have stability in the next year. Obviously, with climate change and the weather changing, it's becoming more and more difficult. The reasons to exit the industry are becoming more and more obvious. Yet we're still not seeing adequate support from our government or internationally from other governments. And so, on our Take Action page on our website, we have a petition. We're trying to lobby the New Zealand government to find alternatives for our farmers. And also on Water Bear, if you've just watched the film, hopefully people have also found the petition from change.org, which you can find on their website, and also through our social media, our media platforms, a petition as well to globally get a 25% reduction of the global dairy herd by 2025. It's very ambitious, but like we say, we've got to aim for the top.
Yeah. I have a question about that. And as far as like what you've learned is in relation to farmers being able to still farm, but transition to something else, as we've had definitely, people trying to do that work over here. And the conversations are mostly mushrooms that were previously chicken farms, different types of grains, soybeans. But what I learned is that depending on the animal and the obviously the cows being the largest animal of the main food animals that we, use and abuse and put on our plates, that it's very destructive to the land, like we've talked about. And so it's not just goodbye cows, hello new grain in a matter of a couple of weeks or 6 months or whatever. It can take many years for the land to regenerate, to be able to produce at a volume that's needed to keep the farmer in business of a plant crop. So that really puts the farmer between a rock and a hard place. What are they supposed to do for that year, that 2 years, the 5 years, as their land is regenerating? Have you guys talked about, worked on, thought about what is that solution look like?
Yeah, similar issues here, and there's no easy solution. There's no easy answer for this one. The diversity of landscapes that we have here in Aotearoa, the different slopes and depths of soil, rainfall, the amount of sunshine, etc. We have a lot of different microclimates here in Aotearoa, and so we have big potential to grow a huge diversity of different foods, which for a capitalist market, for food producers dealing in commodities, it's not really ideal. And the fact that we live, Aotearoa is on, the other side of the world for most places. We're in the middle of a huge ocean. It doesn't make sense that we are, food producers for the rest of the world. It doesn't make sense that we have an economy based off of exporting in a climate where people are now looking for local foods. Locally produced foods in terms of disruptions that are potentially coming, precision fermentation, for example. Those facilities are going to be set up right next to consumers themselves. And so we have all sorts of difficulties facing us here in Aotearoa as a food producing nation. We're moving into a world where we will be obsolete in many ways. Worldwide, a lot of us are already producing enough plant-based food as it is. It's more of a distribution issue that we have in terms of the amount of food that we have to feed everybody. And so, there are emerging niche markets, I would say, here in Aotearoa. But it's a difficult one. We're moving into an age of automation, of technological disruptions left, right, and center. What I am moving more into is the need for an exiting fund rather than a transitional fund for our farmers, because our reality, which is hard for a lot of people to understand, is that they're not just going to be able to move into producing indefinitely, an alternative. We need to be moving towards more efficient models. We need to be farming less, but farming the right thing. But whether or not Aotearoa is the right country to be doing that is another question. But yeah, it's the early adopters who are going to get there first. Those here in Aotearoa who are, dragging things along are going to be left behind. And those are the indebted farmers, the smaller operations who are not able to transition, sadly.
Does in the United States, Darcy, you know better than anyone, the subsidies that our government gives to dairy producers, if that money was taken and instead of giving it to them to produce and to shore up the dairy industry, was given over to farmers to exit or transition, do you have that, Chris, in Aotearoa? Aotearoa?
This is turning into a comedy show.
Aotearoa. Good on you for trying. Good on you for trying. And I really appreciate it.
So what are the subsidies? Yeah.
Subsidies. We don't have direct subsidies for our farmers. And I think that's something they will quite proudly say, is that they don't have subsidies. But water by and large is free. We should have a tax on water. Irrigation for dairy farms is the primary water take in Aotearoa. Agricultural emissions are not paid for. We have the emissions trading scheme, which taxes industries based on the emissions that they produce. Agriculture has a huge exemption from the emissions trading scheme that they don't have to pay. And in terms of biosecurity, the government handles all biosecurity costs in terms of exports. And something that we talk about briefly in the film, and it wasn't until after the fact that I realized we didn't put in the amount that it cost for this program. It's hundreds of millions of dollars to eradicate a disease that was throughout the dairy herd here in Aotearoa, Mycoplasma bovis. It's a disease that is common in most countries. I think there is only one other country in the world that doesn't have this in their dairy herd. But because, of course, the industry likes to talk about themselves as the most efficient producer, they will go to incredible lengths to, maintain that, 0.1% difference to an international competitor.
Right.
And so the government has paid hundreds of millions of dollars to eradicate diseases. We don't tax water. Like I said, in terms of land confiscation, a lot of land for the industry has been free, and they've had free labor on this land from the animals, of course. And so, yeah, no direct subsidies, but there are a lot of ways that our government is propping up the industry. And likewise for America and other countries, if we removed those ways that our governments support and prop up these industries and start moving towards progressive alternatives, then the more likely we're going to be finding solutions for our farmers, our humans, who are unfortunately as well tied up in these situations.
Yeah, well, here it'd be overnight. We're about $35 billion a year. It's just staggering. And they spend $350 million alone every year just on the marketing. So, got milk mustache, milk does the body good. Yep. All of that. My dog just had Mycoplasma canine.
Oh, wow.
And we almost lost him. I just thought, oh my gosh, all those herds of those cows, he was very, very sick. So I just, God bless their hearts. I know milk has been called a global story told with a local eye, which I just think is the perfect description. People want to know how they might walk away from the film. Documentaries that expose truths such as this can be hard to watch. Will people walk away from the film inspired, upset, sad, happy, something else altogether?
My hope is that people walk away feeling hopeful about the situation. That's the way that we designed the film, and that's the feedback that we've received from a lot of people. For me, you always have to talk about solutions, and you always have to highlight the positive and things that we can look forward to and work towards together. And so it wasn't so much a conscious decision to have the film laid out that way. It just happened naturally. We just thought, of course, we have to come up with solutions. We have to work with people to find progressive pathways. I know a lot of people are worried about confronting animal footage. In the trailer, for example, there's a few graphic images. I think we probably didn't portray the film correctly with that trailer. It's a good, hard-hitting trailer, and I love it, but there are some graphic images, and the graphic images in that trailer, that's probably all you'll see in the actual film itself. Those images were just pulled out for dramatic effect in the trailer. But yes, the film, not to spoil anything, but our goal was to create something to reinvigorate people and to bring hope. I always wanted it to be a resource for animal rights advocates and environmentalists, for them to be able to use that as a resource when talking to people, but also for themselves. I was really hoping, for a lot of like hardcore activists and whatnot, that they'd have a film that they can watch and to be reinvigorated by it and to feel like there is hope, because there is, and there's always hope. We just need to remind ourselves that it's there. We get distracted by all the negative things we see on social media and in the news. And so, yeah, we knew we had to highlight those positive aspects that are out there.
And it wasn't at the audience selection at the New Zealand Film Festival?
It was the most popular, so the most attended. Yeah, the most attended film at the New Zealand International Film Festival.
Wow. Yeah, that says a whole lot.
For those who I've seen it twice and I loved it both times, and I will see it a third time and I'll just be just as enthralled. And a lot of it's because it's like a detective story. It follows you, Chris, as you go along learning, and we learn alongside you, and you get if you falter here or you get information here, you come up against roadblocks. So it's really interesting in itself just to see your journey. It's very personal to you. And so this isn't an animal rights treatise, as much as I love those, but I know a lot of people are afraid of them. And no, this is something that it is about another country. It's also about our entire world, because what we learn here applies to every other country. So it's really an enjoyable, entertaining, if I may say, film, if not just to see the landscape of Aotearoa.
I think you add a syllable. I think that's what's
adding a syllable.
I'm adding a syllable. Hold on. Aotearoa.
Beautiful. Perfect.
Thank you. I had it written out phonetically at the top of my questions. So, I'm curious. Have you gotten any backlash yet from the industry? It's so powerful.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's been a call out from the industry to not engage with us at all. We haven't received any negative backlash. We're about to release a press release, and if we've got a few kind of media catch stunts in the works, and so we haven't had the initial splash. So if there is backlash coming, potentially within the very near future, once we release our press release and get a little bit more out there. But yeah, nothing negative so far, only positive messages and feedback, especially from farmers as well. I've been getting a lot of messages from farmers saying that, this is a difficult subject, and that they really appreciate the angle and the way that we've portrayed farmers in the film. For us, it was very important that we didn't demonize farmers. That's been a goal from the beginning. Because this needs to be a conversation with all of us together, respectfully, and so for farmers, for Fonterra, Dairy NZ, anyone out there who's thinking about, reacting negatively or giving us backlash, I just hope that they watch the film and that they come at us with conversations from there, because we do genuinely want to engage. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, if there was anything they would come back on is if the farmers were demonized, and you do the exact opposite of that. I've learned with some media stunts that we did the end of last year with Starbucks, which is obviously a huge corporation, they've gotten a lot smarter than they used to be. 10 years they'd come flying after us, but
right.
They just look ridiculous. Yeah. If they come after the little guy, little girl, it's just, there's really nothing to say that helps them at all in the media. I mean, who knows what they're going to do, but it does seem like big corporations. Alexandra's been in this work much longer than I have. They've gotten a little sharper, a little smarter as far as like what they say and how they, come after activist, I find anyway.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I love watching interviews from old industry leaders from, 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
They're so brazen and just outright like all sorts of things.
Yeah. It's like, they've definitely shut your mouth.
They've got a lot slicker.
Yeah.
And with Fonterra, they acknowledge that customers are changing and have higher standards and want, more sustainable and ethically produced products. And so, there's room for us to work together. But some of our language is the same, but like I said before, they're based around propaganda, marketing lies, and they're embedded and profiting a very small demographic who are going to be digging their heels in for as long as they can. So
my favorite,
crossed, but not holding my breath.
No, exactly. I mean, it is what it is, whatever they say anyway, right? It's like, watch the film. But I on that subject, on that point, almost my favorite line in the film is the lady of Asian descent who says, "We produce world-class dairy." And my husband watched it with me, and he does not spout off about any of this stuff ever. And he just looked at me and he goes, "What? That's like saying we produce world-class heroin." Like what? It's like, whoa, babe, that might be a little strong, but it was especially ridiculous coming from someone whose people are about 95, 96, 98% completely lactose intolerant, and this product makes violently ill. It's like the disconnect was just mind blowing.
Yeah. Like I say, Chinese market, we heavily rely on the Chinese market, and so in a lot of Fonterra's advertisements and whatnot, you see Asian representatives quite often, which I think is telling of the demographics that they have to speak to. Marketing to that demographic, just ridiculous.
Yeah, it truly is.
Where can we find the movie?
So at the moment, it's on Water Bear and as well the Plant Based News YouTube channel. Water Bear, for those of you who don't know about Water Bear, it's kind of like the Netflix for environmental documentaries. And so there's a lot of great films on there. We're really happy to have The Home of Milked on there. It's made by the producer of the film My Octopus Teacher, which is a beautiful film. I definitely recommend that one to people as well. Also the Plant Based News YouTube channel, which we're really proud to have on there as well. They've got a really good relationship with their followers, and followers, vegans and plant-based advocates, they're the ones that are most passionate about this topic. And so we're happy to put it in front of everybody there so that they can be advocates for the film, which we know they will be. So thank you, and thank you to everyone in advance for sharing the film, commenting and supporting. And just everyone throughout the whole journey of making the film, our Indiegogo supporters, everyone who's been giving feedback. It's been an amazing journey, and can't wait for people to see the film, and definitely send us feedback. Go onto our website. There's a few follow-up tasks to do after you've watched the film, some actions you can take, and of course, some amazing resources from Switch for Good around changing your lifestyle, getting onto a dairy-free diet, and even taking things a little bit further in terms of veganism if you want. There's resources on there as well.
That website is it Milk the Movie, or is it Milk?
Yes, it's milked.film.
.film. Okay, great. One last thing, Chris, what's next for you? What kind of rabble-rousing, what huge corporation are you going to take on next?
Well, I mean, the dream, right, would be that Milked the film collapses the dairy industry here in Aotearoa. but that's going to be an ongoing battle, probably for the rest of my life, I would say. And so I'm not looking to change targets at the moment. The dairy industry is, it's our biggest hurdle here in Aotearoa, here in our country, in terms of just our waterways, for example. Just the waterways that's a kaupapa, a project that I could spend the rest of my life on in terms of protecting. The greenhouse gas emissions created by this industry is a huge thing as well, but just water is probably going to be a big focus for me moving into the future. Water is life. Without water, all of us would perish, as we say in the film. It's as true can be. It really is the life force, and we're squandering it at the moment. And so for me, I'm keen to protest as much as I can, but also work more on a community level. I'm thinking of settling down, for example, and going back to where I'm from, where I was raised. And I would love to be a steward for my waterway that I spent a lot of my life in as a child, where I got my nourishment from the environment. I would love to settle down as close as I can to that waterway, and then start some initiatives and programs to protect that specific waterway, and then to start encouraging people throughout the country to do the same, to move home, take responsibility and sovereignty of their own area, and come up with community initiatives to protect environmental landscapes, especially waterways within their own areas.
Chris, thank you so much for being on our show. And we're so excited to be able to share this wonderful, wonderful project with our listeners and our viewers.
Yeah. Of course. No,
yeah.
Thank you
for having me. Honor.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Soon, my friend.
Talk soon. Ka kite. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thank you.
Hey, folks. Okay. Back by very popular demand is our plant-powered plate fridge magnet, which you are going to receive for free if you leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So here are the details. Just write your quick review. Does not need to be long, does not need to be a whole story. Just be honest and speak from the heart. Then take a quick screenshot of the review you wrote and email it to us at podcast@switchforgood.org. That's podcast@switchforgood.org. And include your mailing address so we can send you a power plate. We are doing this because the more reviews we garner, the higher we go in search results, which means more folks will learn about our podcast. So the power is in your hands. Leave us a review, and zoom, your power plate arrives at your doorstep.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.